Hello everybody, my name is Klaus Fransen, and today we're going to talk about dynamic range and the Canon M50. So the Canon M50 is a entry-level mirrorless camera, and it holds some great features, but it's not the perfect camera. But there are some ways to make it better, and it is knowing the dynamic range of it. How much can you over or underexpose and still get a decent image? So what it did was that I shut off these lights behind me here. I had one softbox up here, and I recorded during the night. I had my M50 placed around here. I exposed for this middle gray, and I increased or decreased the stops of light by one stop up at a time. And I tested 3 different picture styles, because when people start out with the M50, they usually use the standard picture profile. Then they do some research how to get more cinematic footage on the Canon M50. Then they stumble across the custom neutral profile, which I'm using right now up here. And then they might stumble across the CineStyle. And CineStyle have the word cine in it, implying that this is the cinematic version. But you will learn soon that the dynamic range is greater in CineStyle, but you're making some compromises on your highlights, at least in my findings and in my opinion. Okay, so we're now over here on the computer, and I'm just gonna take you through the information on the screen, and then you can make your own opinion, but I will also give you my opinion plus the statistics. Oh, not statistics, more like stats. So we are in DaVinci Resolve. This is the free version, and here you can see it's on the Canon M50 with the Ef-M 22mm 2.0 in standard picture profile. And down here you can see the shutter, the aperture, and the ISO. Up here is just for reminder that any RGB below 0 or at 0 would be pure black and cannot be recovered with any kind of details. Anything above 255 or at 255 will be rendered as a pure white, and again cannot contain any details. Inside this gray card you will see a RGB value at 110. The perfect exposure would have been 122 as mentioned before, but I was slightly underexposed. Slightly, it's not much. And the EV value would be +0. This would be our perfect exposure for this middle gray. Down here to the right, you can also see the scope. And this line here should, if possible, be around here, which it does. After a bit of editing, you can see 125. All right. So I'm not going to go into detail how you're going to grade. We can do that some other time. This is just to give you information of how this test has been done. So to decrease by one stop of light, I am doubling my shutter speed each time. So -1, -2, -3, -4, etc. Then I'm gonna look at the RGB number, and once that hits 0, I know there are no information left in this area. Now, no information is, I mean, there's still some, but yeah, it is so little that I've rendered it as a 0, right? And you see here 0 across the board, but if you grade it up, you can still get this out of it. Okay, and that's about it. We do the same thing. I am lowering my shutter speed by 50%, meaning the shutter is open for twice as long, letting in twice as much light in the photo. So you have +0, +1 stop, +2 stops, or at least 2 stops over the perfect exposure. And you have +3, and you can see here that the RGB value is getting close to clipping, and it is clipping on my face. On the +2, you can see it actually clipping the red channel on my face, even though we are well within our limit here. So I'm gonna talk about a usable dynamic range and a theoretical dynamic range in my testings, because this is theoretically still valid. This is still valid, but I mean, look at the this image, right? And at +4, it's just completely useless. And you can see the whole gray card here is rendered as a pure white. Okay, now we got that covered. The next thing you will have to notice is that I am changing between standard picture profile, but I'm using the same settings, right? So the only thing that's going to change is the standard picture profile. So I got a custom picture profile in the neutral, and I got the Cinestyle installed. We're going to compare the three of them. You can see I did the same testing, and yeah, you might have noticed that the RGB value here on the Cinestyle is not really dropping, and it's containing way more information. And also, if I apply my grade here, you can actually get more information out from the Cinestyle in these extreme underexposed cases. So I plotted the things into Excel. So here we have the exposure values. We have the standard picture profile with its RGB values. We have the custom neutral profile and its RGB values. We have the Cinestyle with its RGB values. Plus a Cinestyle with minor tweaks, because there's no way that I am gonna use this picture without changing my blacks. Yeah, it's just too flat to be used in practical, right? So that's what that is. Oh, didn't get into. So, got the RGB values, and once this number reaches 255, there will be no more details left in the highlights. And this is true for all three, that 4 stops over. I mean, it doesn't matter what picture profile you're in, you will clip your highlights. Then we have +3, and we can see that the standard picture profile is coming in a lot hotter, a lot brighter than the custom and the Cinestyle version. You can also see it here on the graph that the standard picture profile have a more traditional S-curve look, because there's already added contrast and color into this profile, meaning that you as an editor will have less of control to do it yourself in post. Now, if we look at the green area here, this is me trying to tell you what is actually usable. If you under or overexpose the gray card value here by 1 or 2 stops, you are still able to recover the image and get a clean result. In my findings and my personal opinion, I think that the custom picture profile looks the best, even under or underexposed. But the Cinestyle is able to obtain so much details in a situation with absolutely no light. And if we count the theoretical dynamic range, we can count sum of 10 for the standard, a sum of 10, but it actually have way more leeway up here than the other one had in the 3 stops over. So I'm gonna put it as a 10.5 stop, so you're getting a little bit in the highlights compared to the standard profile. Then you have the Cinestyle, which I guess in theory have 12 stops of dynamic range, but I have listed as 11 because the -8 is not usable in my opinion. I'm not sure what they are doing to keep this level. And if you look at the curve, they are not increasing. I mean, this is twice as much light that's coming in between 8 and 7, but the curve is not moving. Same thing from 7 to 6, not moving. 6 to 5, we see a small bump. So I guess it's more fair to say that the dynamic range is pretty much equal to the others. Speaking of the curve here, we can see that the Cinestyle starts off brighter than the rest and remains so throughout the exposures until we get to the highlights, the overexposure, and it actually does the opposite of an S-curve. This is important, and I will get back to that in a minute once we got the pictures in front of us again. So the standard picture profile, S-curvy, the custom neutral, very similar to the standard, but it's way more smooth or not as harsh in the highlights. It's not as graduate, or not a graduate, it's not as steep of a climb each time we double the exposure. And why that is important is that if we look at this example, this is the custom Newton profile. This is ungraded, and this is with a bit of grading. Now, the contrast might be a bit harsh, but we can always correct that later. But you can see how smooth the highlight is rolling off my face. And I'm a huge fan of that. If you start to pay attention to how the light is gradually going from bright to dark, you'll see a much more natural and nice looking image. Remember that I just mentioned how the curve on the Cinestyle is a bit of an opposite here. It's going a bit downwards. This is the ungraded, very flat looking, and this is a quick grading, and you might be able to do it better. But if you look at my skin, there's a bit of a color warping, color shifting. There's a bit yellow here, red here, and it is just not as smooth as the custom neutral profile. And I think that is because that the Cinestyle is trying to keep so much detail both in the shadows and in the highlights as possible. So it's bumping down the highlights itself, creating a weird S-curve. This is causing these blemishes you can see here. So you might actually need to bump this even higher to get the proper roll-off. And you can see if you go back into here and scroll on to here, if you force an S-curve downwards in the upper half, you're getting these weird hard shifting differences. You do not want that. You want this smooth S-curve, traditionally speaking, right? If you look at the standard picture profile, it looks pretty good out of the gate. A bit of grading, it's a bit much maybe. You can always adjust, right? But as it is, I think it looks pretty good, nice and smooth. And in theory, you shouldn't really need to do much grading because it's already graded in camera. Me personally, I prefer the custom neutral profile with a slight bit of grading, a little more contrast, a little more color, right? So when should you use the standard profile, and when should you use the neutral, and when should you use the Cinestyle? Because each have their own purpose. The standard picture profile is great if you do not want to do any sort of color grading. You just want something that looks good right out the gate. You might even want to bump up the contrast, but be aware that if you go one above, perfect exposure so to say, right? And if you go above 2, there's no real way to recover that with grading, okay? And the reason being that, okay, another thing, remember RGB? In skin tones, you will always see that the red is higher than the green, and the green is higher than the blue. So this is the ungraded version. You can see 255 means it is clipping. The red is clipping, and the green and blue is not. If I looked at my histogram on my M50, I would not be able to see that my face is clipping because the RGB value is on an average of 217 on this gray card, right? So be aware of that. Do not trust your histogram completely when you're exposing for faces or skin tones in general. If we look at the custom neutral profile, I feel like I can go under and recover somewhat, then you can tweak it as much as you want, add a bit of saturation, whatever you feel looks good. If you look for the noise, even though we are increasing the exposure in post, we do have some slight noise, but it's not a lot. If you look at the -2 with grading, we get more noise, a little bit of color noise, but it's not too bad. -3, and it's a hell. There's so much noise in this image, and we're not even going for the perfect exposure. And you can see we have colors mixing in, green, red, and blue, shifting between those. So yeah, with a denoiser you might be able to fix it, but I do not have one, and I suggest you always try to get the exposure right in the camera because it's gonna make your job a lot easier. So to sum up, you have your custom neutral profile for your daily use, if you want to have the most control, you have the standard picture profile. You want something that looks good right out the gate. And then you have the CineStyle, which fits a certain niche in my opinion, because at -7 stops from perfect exposure, you're actually able to get an image that isn't too terrible. It is noisy as hell, and it's no way pushed up to a point where you're gonna use it in the movie. But compare this -7 to this -7. Just look at all these horizontal lines. So the CineStyle is amazing if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're in the woods or somewhere where there's absolutely no light. Change your picture style to CineStyle, and you might be able to pick up at least something. -4 is actually looking pretty good, as long as you're not pushing the grading further than this. I mean, once you do something like this, I mean, you will see the image fall apart. But yeah, CineStyle is amazing if you are in a situation with absolutely no light. But like I said, I do not like the way the highlights roll off. So this actually looks pretty good. We've got the values up to a somewhat standard perfect color grading. And yeah, it looks nice. I actually think it looks better than what I managed to do on the +0, but that might just be my grading that is a bit off. Oh yeah. Right, so we talked about the shadows, but what about the highlights? If you overexpose on the Canon M50, a +1, it's not too bad. If you're in +2, you are doing something very wrong, especially in the CineStyle. Since it's brighter throughout the whole thing, it's also going to clip earlier. And +2, you can look at the RGB values here. You got clipping on the red, almost clipping the blue, and the green. And if we try to grade it, it's no good. This is not a pleasant looking image at all. And the motion blur you're seeing is because I'm shooting at 1/10 of a second to get that light in. +3, and yeah, there's no way of covering from that. If we take a look at the +1 for the custom Newton profile, quick grading looks nice. And it actually, I might say that you should probably overexpose ever so slightly to get a really nice clean image on the M50. Just a tad. +2 on the custom Newton profile, and we see a bit of clipping approaching in the skin tones, but we're just beneath what we can push. And if we do like this, try to get the perfect exposure right, it's not good. I'm looking a bit sick. It's so shiny. Look at how shiny my skin is. Compared to here, huge difference. There's nothing wrong with a bit of contrast and a bit of light hitting on the face like this, but this is, yeah, I look sick. And the standard picture profile is pretty much the same. You go one above and you're fine. +2, this is ungraded. You see clipping on the skin in the red channel, and it looks terrible once corrected. So what this means is, again, each profile for each kind of use. Standard is great for, I guess, hobbyists who just want to share it after they recorded something, doesn't want to do any kind of editing. Custom profile is my recommendation for anybody who wants to do something serious with their video. And CineStyle are for those cases where you are finding yourself in absolutely no light. The reason it's super important to know how to expose on this camera, if you're owning a Canon M50, which I assume you do, is that now you know that if you get your exposure right for the face of your subject, and you have like a super bright window behind them, you can lower your exposure by 1 stop and still get a clean image without much noise or issues. You can even bump your exposure 1 up from the perfect exposure if you want to raise the details in the back and still get a clean image. Going 2 stops over is a bad idea. Going 2 steps under might work in the custom neutral profile, but going 3 steps under and you will probably need some kind of denoising software. I can confidently say that I'm gonna keep using the custom neutral profile for my daily use, and I'm gonna use the Cinestyle whenever I'm in a situation with absolutely no light. It won't look as good as a lit setup, that's just how it is. But yeah, also remember this dynamic range test were done on video. If you are a photographer, you will probably notice that you can underexpose way more and still get back the details. So videos do not contain as much details as a photograph. If you get your exposure right from the start, you are off from a much better place for color grading and editing your videos. If you want to be super serious about your video work, get a monitor. Doesn't have to be an external recorder, just get a monitor that have either zebra or waveform monitor, or even better, false color. False color is amazing. I'm only starting to use it now, and it's so nice. It's so nice to use it for exposing. I hope you learned something. I definitely did. And yeah, thank you for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, check out my Instagram, all that stuff. And I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.